made the scream ripped through the marble halls of the billionaire's mansion like glass shattering in a quiet church. It wasn't the usual whiny cry of a spoiled child denied a toy. It was raw, blood-curdling terror. Maria dropped the silver tray she was carrying. The glasses splintered across the tiles, but she didn't stop. She ran toward the sound, her heart pounding like a war drum. She had heard that kind of scream once before in her life, long ago, when her little brother had been dragged into a van and she had been too weak, too young to stop it. She had vowed never again. The scream came again, high-pitched, desperate. She found him in the garden. Ethan, the billionaire's only son, the boy with tousled blonde hair and ocean blue eyes that could melt stone, was struggling against a man dressed in black. The intruder had one arm clamped around the boy's chest and another hand pressing a knife against his side. Ethan's small fists flailed in panic. Maria didn't think. She didn't even hesitate. She grabbed the heavy iron candle holder left on the garden table from the last party, rushed forward, and swung it with every ounce of strength her tired body had. The weapon cracked against the man's head, sending him sprawling. Ethan stumbled free, sobbing, and Maria scooped him into her arms, trembling. The mansion guards came running far too late, their radios crackling with alarm. By the time they restrained the dazed kidnapper, Maria was already holding Ethan close, whispering, "It's all right. I've got you. You're safe." But Ethan wasn't the only one trembling. Maria's hands shook violently, not from fear of what had just happened, but from fear of what would follow. The billionaire himself, Alexander Hale, arrived minutes later, his face pale with fury and terror. He was a man used to control of his empire, his wealth, his future. But in that moment, staring at his son clinging to a maid, his control slipped. "Ethan," he barked, his voice breaking as he pulled the boy from Maria's arms. He hugged his son tight, kissing his forehead, whispering his name like a prayer. Then his sharp eyes turned to Maria. "What happened?" The guards explained, stumbling over their words, while Maria stood silently, her apron stained with dirt and blood from the struggle. Alexander looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time noticed the quiet strength she carried. A maid, just a maid. And yet she had done what his entire security team had failed to do. She had saved his son. "You risked your life," he said finally, his voice low, almost reverent. Maria only shook her head. "He's just a child," she whispered. "Anyone would have done the same." But Alexander knew the truth. Not everyone would. For days, Maria became Ethan's shadow. The boy refused to leave her side. At night, when nightmares racked him, he would call for her, not his father, not the nanny. It was Maria's voice that calmed him, Maria's arms that gave him peace. Alexander watched, torn between gratitude and something else he couldn't name. This maid, this quiet young woman who had always blended into the background of his grand home, was suddenly the center of his son's fragile world. But gratitude soon turned into questions. The kidnapper had confessed nothing, only sneered through interrogation. There was no ransom note, no clear motive. Alexander's enemies were many, but the attempt had been reckless, desperate. Something didn't add up. And then came the truth. It was the investigator, hired privately by Alexander, who brought it to him late one evening. "Mr. Hale," he said grimly, "you need to hear this." Maria wasn't just a maid. Her real surname wasn't the one on her employment papers. She wasn't just an immigrant woman working to send money home. She was connected, by blood, to one of Alexander's oldest business rivals. Her father had been ruined years ago by a deal gone wrong with Hale Enterprises. Bankruptcy had stripped him of everything, and the shame had driven him to desperation. Maria, his only daughter, had vanished soon after, changing her name, working small jobs, trying to build a life from ashes. And the kidnapper, he was no stranger, he was her cousin. Alexander's heart sank, as the truth pierced him like ice. When he confronted her, Maria's face went pale. She didn't deny it. Her hands trembled as she folded the laundry in the servants' quarters, as though clinging to something ordinary to ground her. "Yes," she whispered. "He was my cousin, but I swear to you I didn't know. I left that life behind. He must have found me, he must have." Her voice broke. "I would never hurt Ethan, never." Alexander's fury battled with his reason. The image of her saving his son warred against the betrayal of her silence. "You should have told me," he said coldly. "And lost my job, been thrown out before I could send money home to my mother," she asked, her eyes shining with tears. "I've worked every day of my life to be nothing like them. Please believe me." But how could he? His empire was built on suspicion, on trust traded like currency. And now his son's savior was tied to the very people who had tried to destroy him. For nights, Alexander didn't sleep. Ethan grew withdrawn, sensing the tension. He clung harder to Maria, refusing to eat unless she was near. The boy's fragile recovery was shattering. Finally, one stormy evening, Maria packed her small bag. She couldn't bear Ethan's tears, Alexander's silent glares, the whispers of the other staff. She would leave before she was thrown out. She would disappear again. But as she tiptoed toward the servants' exit, a small hand grabbed hers. Ethan, in his pajamas, his face blotchy from crying. "Don't go," he whispered, his voice shaking. "You promised you'd keep me safe." Maria knelt, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I will always, but sometimes people don't want me here." "I do," Ethan said firmly, with the conviction only a child's love could carry. Behind them, Alexander stood in the doorway, silent. He had followed the sound of his son's voice, and in that moment he saw what he had been too blinded by fear to admit. Ethan didn't just need protection. He needed love. He needed Maria. Alexander's voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "Stay." Maria froze. He stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. "I don't care about your past. I care about what you've done. You saved my son. You gave him back his laughter, and that matters more than bloodlines or betrayals." Her tears fell harder. "You believe me?" "I do," he said simply. From that night, everything changed. The investigation revealed more. Her cousin had acted alone, desperate for money, bitter over the family's downfall. Maria had cut ties with him years ago. Slowly, Alexander's trust rebuilt itself, brick by fragile brick. But it wasn't just trust. It was something deeper, something unexpected. Late nights spent comforting Ethan turned into conversations that stretched into dawn. Alexander found himself drawn to Maria's quiet strength, the way she carried pain without bitterness, the way she laughed softly when Ethan did something silly, the way she treated everyone, rich or poor, with the same dignity. And Maria, despite every warning in her heart, found herself softening to the man behind the empire. She saw not just the billionaire, but the father who paced the halls when his son had nightmares. The man who had built walls so high around himself, he had forgotten what it was like to let anyone in. It wasn't an easy road. Gossip spread, business partners scoffed, the staff whispered, but Alexander stood firm, and Ethan, innocent, pure-hearted Ethan, made it simple. "She saved me," he would say proudly. "She's my hero." Months later, at a charity gala, Alexander introduced Maria not as a maid, not as an employee, but as someone who had become family. Cameras flashed, murmurs filled the hall, but Alexander didn't care. Because sometimes, the people we least expect are the ones who save us, not just from danger but from ourselves. And as Maria held Ethan's small hand in hers and Alexander's steady hand rested on her shoulder, she realized the truth too. Saving Ethan hadn't just been fate. It had been the beginning of a new life, one built not on the past but on courage, forgiveness, and love. The truth had shattered him once, but it had also pieced him back together, stronger, braver, and no longer alone.